I didn't raise my voice. I didn't pack a bag and leave. I didn't even cry. Not that night anyway. I just stood at my own front door, in the cold, at 9:30 on a Tuesday evening in November. And I couldn't get in. My key didn't work. Let me back up a little, because I know how that sounds. I know what you're probably already thinking. Why didn't she call the police? Why didn't she break a window? Why didn't she do something? And I've asked myself those questions too, believe me. But when you're 63 years old and you're standing in front of the house you've owned for 27 years, and your key won't turn in a lock you don't recognize, your brain doesn't jump to action right away. It goes quiet. Like it can't quite make sense of what's happening. Like the world has shifted 2 inches to the left and you're still trying to find your footing. So I stood there for a moment. Then I tried the key again. Then I went around back and tried that door too. Nothing. The locks had been changed. My name is Irene. No. Sorry, I keep starting that way out of habit, like I'm introducing myself at a church potluck. Let me just say this. I am 63 years old. I lived in a 3-bedroom house in Burlington, Ontario, and I have one son. His name is my son, and I love him more than I know how to say out loud. That's important to understand. None of what I'm about to tell you changes that. My son and I have always been close, the way 2 people who've survived a lot together tend to be close. We lost his father when my son was 17. A heart attack, sudden. The kind that gives you no warning and no chance to say goodbye. After that, it was just the 2 of us for a long time. I went back to work full-time at the insurance company where I'd been working part-time for years. I made sure he finished school. He went to Guelph for university, came back, got a decent job in logistics. I was proud of him. Still am, even now, even after everything. He met her about 4 years ago, my daughter-in-law. I'll call her that because that's what she is, legally speaking, even if the word feels strange in my mouth now. She was fine at first, polite, asked me questions about myself at dinner, remembered I don't eat shellfish. She worked in real estate staging, going into people's homes and arranging them to sell. And she was good at it, from what I understood. She had opinions about furniture and natural light, and what colors made a room feel larger. My son seemed happy, and that mattered to me more than anything else. They got married in September 2 years ago. Small ceremony. COVID had messed up their original plans, and they just kept putting things off until they decided to do something simple at a conservation area outside of Ancaster. 30 people, maybe. I made butter tarts for the dessert table because my daughter-in-law said she loved them, and I wanted to do something useful. Looking back, I wonder if I should have paid more attention to certain things even then. But I'm not the kind of person who reads into things. I prefer to take people at face value until they show me otherwise. They showed me otherwise. It just took a while. It started about 14 months ago, when my son called me on a Sunday afternoon. I remember I was in the middle of making a big pot of ham and split pea soup, the kind that takes most of the day, and I almost let the call go to voicemail because I had the stove going and my hands were a mess. But I picked up. He said they were having some financial trouble. He didn't go into details at first, just said things had gotten tight. My daughter-in-law's business had slowed down considerably. The housing market in the Greater Toronto area had been unpredictable, and staging jobs were drying up. My son's company had gone through a round of layoffs, and while he still had his job, his hours had been cut. They were renting a condo in Oakville, and the rent had just gone up at renewal. We were wondering, he said, and then he paused in that way he's had since he was a little boy when he's about to ask for something he's not sure. I'll say yes to. Could we stay with you for a bit? Just until we get back on our feet. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He's my son. Just for a few months, he told me. We'll contribute to groceries. We won't get in your way. I told him he didn't need to contribute to anything. It was his home too, and I meant it. They moved in 3 weeks later, on a Saturday, with a rental truck and 7 large boxes of kitchen things. I'd cleared out the spare room and the small room beside it that I'd been using as a sewing space. I moved my sewing machine into my bedroom. It wasn't a big deal, I told myself. Families do this. This is what families do. The first month was fine. It was actually nice, to be honest. The house felt alive again in a way it hadn't since my son moved out years before. I could hear voices in the evening. The kitchen smelled like food more often. My daughter-in-law made a lamb stew one Sunday that was genuinely good, and she set the table properly with cloth napkins, which I appreciated. But there were small things I noticed and filed away without meaning to. My daughter-in-law started rearranging things, not dramatically, not all at once. A bowl moved from the kitchen counter to a cabinet. The coat rack I'd had by the front door since 1998 relocated to the back hallway. Throw cushions from the living room couch disappeared and were replaced with different ones. Gray, flat, not very comfortable, that she said she'd gotten from a client's staging inventory. I didn't say anything. They were small things. She took photographs of every room when they arrived. I noticed this but didn't ask why. She said something about wanting to remember how the space was laid out before they got settled. That seemed reasonable at the time. About 6 weeks in, she mentioned, very casually over dinner, that the house would probably benefit from some updates before I thought about selling it someday. I told her I wasn't thinking about selling. She said, of course. She just meant, eventually, it was good to think ahead. She knew the market. My son nodded and changed the subject. I let it pass. But I felt something shift very slightly in the room. It was around the 2-month mark that she started what I can only describe as a quiet audit of my home. I came into the kitchen one morning and found her going through the cupboard above the refrigerator, the one where I keep documents, mostly. Appliance manuals, my son's old school reports I'd never thrown out, a few envelopes. She had a folder open on the counter, and she was going through papers, not frantically, just calmly, like she was doing something perfectly normal. I asked her what she was looking for. She smiled and said she was just trying to get organized. She thought it might help to know where everything was in the house, in case of an emergency. I asked what kind of emergency she had in mind. She said, "Oh, in case something happened to you." I didn't say anything else. I closed the cupboard. I took my coffee outside to the back patio even though it was only March and still cold enough to see my breath. Later, I mentioned it to my son. I said I'd found his wife going through my papers and that it made me uncomfortable. He said she was probably just trying to be helpful. He said, she gets anxious when things aren't organized. She's always been that way. He said I should talk to her if it bothered me. I said it did bother me. He said he'd mention it. He didn't mention it, or if he did, it didn't make any difference. A few weeks after that, my daughter-in-law asked me about the house itself. Not casually this time. We were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, just the two of us. My son was on a work call, and she asked me directly whether the mortgage was paid off. I told her it was, paid off in 2019. She nodded. like I'd confirmed something she'd already suspected. Then, she asked whether I'd thought about what would happen to the house when I was gone. I put my tea down. I told her I had a will and that my affairs were in order and that I didn't think this was a conversation we needed to have. She said she wasn't trying to be intrusive. She just thought it was good to be proactive about these things, and wasn't it better to plan while everyone was still well and clear-headed? I looked at her across my kitchen table, in my kitchen, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not anger. Exactly, something quieter than anger, but with more weight to it. I said goodnight and went to bed. That night, lying in the dark, I thought about what she'd actually said. The words themselves sounded reasonable, even responsible. But I kept coming back to the tone. The assumption underneath it, the idea that she had any business asking. I didn't sleep well. A month passed, then another. They had now been living with me for just over 4 months. There was no longer any talk of a few months. My son mentioned once that the housing market was still difficult, and it didn't make sense to rush into anything. I agreed with him because I love him and because I didn't want to be the kind of mother who makes her son feel like a burden is being placed on her, even when one is. My daughter-in-law had by now effectively taken over the living room, not all at once, and never in a way I could point to and say that. She'd removed the framed photographs from the mantel above the fireplace. My wedding photo. My son, at 6 years old in a canoe on Georgian Bay. A picture of me and my sister at Niagara-on-the-Lake the summer before she got sick. She said she was going to find nicer frames for them and had put them in a box in the hall closet. They were still in the box. In their place, she'd put 3 decorative objects: a ceramic vase, a candle, a small abstract sculpture. And the effect was what she probably called minimalist and what I called bare. I didn't say anything. I retrieved my wedding photo and put it in my bedroom. But something about that box in the closet stayed with me. There was something in the act of putting my family into a box that I couldn't let go of, even though I tried. The Tuesday it happened, I'd been out for most of the day. I had a dental appointment in the morning on Brant Street. Just a cleaning, nothing major, and then I'd met my friend for lunch at a restaurant near the waterfront. We got talking, as we do, and before I knew it, it was past 3 o'clock. I stopped at the Fortino's on Guelph Line to pick up groceries on the way home. A whole chicken, some parsnips, cream, a good loaf of bread. I was thinking I'd make a roast chicken dinner, maybe try to have a normal evening, all of us around the table. I got home around 5:30, I think, though I'd stopped briefly at the post office, so it might have been closer to 6. My son's car was gone. My daughter-in-law's car was in the driveway. I went up the front steps, put my key in the lock, and it didn't turn. I tried again. Then I checked that I had the right key. I did, and tried again. Nothing. The lock was different. I could see it even in the early dark, a different shape than the one I'd had for years. I went around the back. That lock was different too. I stood in my backyard for what felt like a long time, but was probably 2 minutes. Then I called my son. He picked up on the 3rd ring. He was at a work dinner in Hamilton, he said. I told him what was happening. I told him the locks had been changed and I couldn't get into my house. There was a pause. Then he said he thought my daughter-in-law might have arranged for a locksmith. The back door lock had been sticking, he said. He'd asked her to look into getting it fixed. He didn't know she'd done it today. I said, but I can't get in. He said he was sorry, he'd call her, he'd get it sorted out. I waited on my front steps for 20 minutes. The temperature that evening was around 4 degrees. I had my coat, but not my heavier gloves, the ones I keep in the inside pocket, just my driving gloves that don't do much against the cold. My daughter-in-law never came to the door. I called my son again. He didn't answer. I went and sat in my car. Now, I know what you're thinking. And you're not wrong. I should have called the police. I know that. In the abstract, sitting here now, warm with the benefit of hindsight, it is completely obvious that when someone locks you out of your own home, you call the police immediately. You don't sit in your car. You don't wait. But here's what I will try to explain, for whatever it's worth. I am 63 years old, and I have spent my entire life trying not to make things worse. I grew up in a household where you didn't make scenes, where you handled things quietly if you possibly could. I know that's not always right. I know that now. But it's the reflex I have, the one built into me over decades, and that night it didn't occur to me to override it. Also, there was some part of me that simply couldn't believe what was happening. My brain kept searching for a reasonable explanation. Maybe there'd been a break-in and she was just being cautious. Maybe she'd panicked about the sticking lock and ordered a full replacement without thinking. Maybe my son would call back in 5 minutes and the door would open and there would be a perfectly ordinary reason for all of this. I sat in my car and waited for that call. It didn't come. At some point, I reclined the seat and covered myself with the emergency blanket I keep in the back, the thin foil kind from a roadside kit. I was cold. I was tired. I think I slept a little, maybe an hour, maybe less. At some point in the night, my phone lit up with a text from my son that said, "Sorry, Mom, she says the new keys are inside. We'll sort this out tomorrow." I read that text 3 times. The new keys are inside. My keys. To my house. And I was outside. I didn't respond. I just put the phone face down on the passenger seat and lay there in the dark, listening to the street. I want to tell you about a decision I made somewhere around 2 in the morning, lying in the back seat of my Honda with a foil blanket over my legs. I decided I wasn't going to fight this loudly. I wasn't going to call a locksmith myself that night. I wasn't going to wake the neighbors. I wasn't going to let myself be the old woman having a meltdown on the front lawn at 2 in the morning. Not because I didn't have every right to, but because I had thought of something better. But I knew a few things very clearly. I knew that my name is the only name on the deed to that house. I knew that I had a lawyer, a very good one, a woman I'd been using since my husband's estate, whose card was in my wallet right now. I knew that my daughter-in-law, whatever she thought she'd accomplished that evening, had made a very significant legal error. And I knew that I was patient. I had always been patient. My husband used to say it was my greatest quality and also, occasionally, my greatest flaw. But that night, lying in that car, patience felt like exactly the right tool. I thought it through carefully. I thought about what I wanted the next 24 hours to look like. I thought about what I wanted the next week to look like. And then, just before 3 in the morning, I got up, put the seat back upright, started the car, and drove to a Tim Hortons that I knew was open all night on Fairview Street. I got a large double-double and a blueberry muffin, and I sat at a table by the window until the sky started to get light. I was back at the house by 7:30. My son's car was still gone. My daughter-in-law's car was in the driveway. I sat in my own car in front of my own house, and I made 2 calls before I got out. The first was to my lawyer. I left a message on her emergency line explaining the situation in plain terms. The locks had been changed without my knowledge or consent. I had been excluded from my property overnight. I needed to know my options as of first thing this morning. The second call was to a locksmith, not to get back in. I had figured out I could manage without that for another few hours, but to make an appointment for later that day. Then I called my bank. I will not go into all the details of what I discussed with them, only that the conversation was useful and left me feeling considerably more grounded. After that, I went to get a second cup of coffee from a cafe that had just opened on Locust Street. I took my time. I sat by the window. I watched people walk by with their dogs and their strollers and their earphones in, doing ordinary morning things. At 9 a.m., I drove back home. My daughter-in-law answered the door after I knocked. She looked surprised to see me, which told me everything. She had not expected me to come back calm. She'd expected, I think, tears. A confrontation, something she could manage. I smiled at her. I said, "Good morning." I asked if I could come in. She stepped aside. I walked into my own hallway and stood there for a moment, taking in the house. Everything looked the same. The gray cushions were on the couch. My sister's photograph was still in that box in the hall closet. My daughter-in-law stood in the kitchen doorway, watching me. I said, "I spoke with my lawyer this morning." "She didn't say anything," I said. "I also called a locksmith who will be here this afternoon to change the locks again. The new keys will be mine." "I'll give a key to my son," she said. "Now just wait a minute," I said. "I'm not finished. I don't raise my voice. I never have. But I have a way of saying things when I need to that stops the room. My son has always said so. That morning, it worked. I said, "My name is the only name on the title to this property. What happened last night? Changing the locks, leaving me outside. That's not a household disagreement. That's unauthorized exclusion from private property." My lawyer explained the relevant provisions of Ontario's Trespass to Property Act to me this morning. I'm not interested in involving the police if this is resolved properly, but it needs to be resolved. My daughter-in-law had gone quite still. I said, "I need you and my son to find alternative housing within 60 days. That is a reasonable amount of time and more than the law requires me to offer." "I'm offering it because I love my son," she said. "You can't be serious." I said, "I am absolutely serious and I'll need the keys. Both sets by end of day." Then I went to my bedroom and closed the door, and I sat on the edge of my bed, and I will be honest with you, my hands were shaking. They shook for about 10 minutes. I sat very still and breathed and waited for them to stop. My son came home at noon. He knocked on my bedroom door. I opened it. He looked like he hadn't slept. He probably hadn't. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry." I looked at my son, my boy, the 17-year-old, who'd cried in the hospital parking lot, and then stood up straight and held my hand the whole drive home, the one I'd raised and loved and been proud of for 30-something years. And I felt the complicated grief of loving someone who has disappointed you. I said, "I know you are." He said, "She said she did it because she was worried about security. She said she was going to give you a key. I don't know. She didn't. I should have stopped this sooner. I saw things and I didn't." He stopped. I said, "You saw things." He nodded. He couldn't look at me. I said, "I know. And we are going to have to talk about that, you and I, not today, but soon." He asked me if I'd really talked to a lawyer. I told him yes. He asked if I was really asking them to leave. I told him yes. 60 days. I would not be moved on that. I told him I would help them financially. If I could, I would make calls on his behalf. If there were people I knew who might know of apartments opening up, I would not let him drown. But they needed to leave, and she needed to understand that what she'd done was not a small thing. My son sat down on the hallway floor, just sat right down on the floor with his back against the wall, like he was 14 again and exhausted. I sat down next to him. We sat there for a while without talking. Let me tell you about the part nobody expected. That same afternoon, while the locksmith was there changing the locks, good ones, deadbolts on both doors, I went to the hall closet and took out the box with my photographs. I rehung every single one. My wedding photo went back on the mantel. My son at 6 in the canoe, my sister and me at Niagara on the lake, her laughing at something I'd said. The lake behind us bright in the summer light. I took the ceramic vase and the candle and the abstract sculpture, and I put them neatly in a box of my own, labeled with a piece of packing tape and a marker. Your things. I put that box outside the door of their room. I didn't say anything. I didn't leave a note. I didn't need to. When my daughter-in-law came upstairs and saw it, sitting there, she didn't knock on my door. She didn't say anything at all. She just took the box into the room and closed the door. That was enough. That evening I made the roast chicken I'd bought the day before. I roasted it with the parsnips and some carrots I had in the crisper, and I made a simple pan gravy with a splash of apple cider, the way I've always done. I ate at my kitchen table by myself, with the radio on, the CBC evening program, the one with the long interviews. The house smelled like good food. My photographs were back on the mantel. My keys were on the hook by the front door. My hook, where I've always kept them. I poured myself a small glass of white wine, the Riesling from Prince Edward County. I'd been saving for no real reason. And I sat at my table and I ate my dinner. And I listened to the radio. And I felt, for the first time in months, that I was in my home. My daughter-in-law moved out 31 days later. My son followed 2 weeks after that, once they'd found a rental place in Stony Creek. A one-bedroom, which was all they could manage for now. I helped him move some of his boxes. We didn't talk about everything that day, but we talked about some of it, and that was a start. He calls me on Sundays. We're finding our way back to each other, slowly, the way you do after something hard. I think we'll get there. I have to believe that. I've been asked, since then, whether I regret not calling the police that night. Whether I should have. Whether sitting in my car in the cold was weakness or something else. I think about that question. What I know is this. I was patient when I needed to be, and I was firm when I needed to be, and I did not let either thing become permanent. I did not stay patient when patience had run out. And I did not let the firmness harden into something I couldn't come back from. My house is quiet now in the evenings. Some nights that quiet is lonely. Other nights it's exactly what I need. I rehung the picture of my sister last week, straightened the frames, stepped back, looked at it for a while. Her face. The lake. The summer she was still well, and we didn't know yet what was coming. I've started using the sewing room again too. Moved the machine back out to the small room, set up the table, got out the fabric I'd put away. I'm making a quilt. Nothing fancy. Just squares of color, arranged until they feel right. Some things take time to put back in order, but they can be put back. I believe that.